Good evening, everyone. I'd like to take some time this evening and talk to you about three concepts in Unit 7. The first one is the concept of a code book, the code book. When you're analyzing your data, what is a code book? And then we shall look at the types of data and the measurement scales that we normally have to deal with. Then we shall also look at the analysis of open-ended questions or the analysis of qualitative data. Later on this week, I will also post another video and I will talk about other concepts. I'll also share with you these notes so that you can have a copy on your computer. Now, a code book indicates how you will code each answer into a data set. I did the research a few years ago. It was entitled, to show you, I explored the servant leadership theory within the police force of Uganda. I did what they call a phenomenological study, and I interviewed one individual. I had an in-depth discussion, a face-to-face personal interview with one individual that I thought had the information that I needed. And when I did that study, I had transcripts, I had tapes, recorded tapes, and let me show you what I did to make it probably much more easier. This is what I use as a code book. A code book is basically just the way you're going to enter your information. When you are looking through the transcript, for instance, you may have a color, you have a number, and then you have a color, say brown, and that color would then be describing a specific concept, a phenomenon, something that you have observed in the interview. And in this instance, I used brown to describe love. Every time I saw in the interview the aspect of love, I used the color brown. And then I also counted the number of quotations linked to the code, agape or love. I had 12 instances where that concept or that concept came up in the interview. And I defined the code, doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason. And of course, that definition was not mine. I had to give reference of the code. The definition comes from Mr. Winston. So this was my code book. So every concept that I came across in the interview, when I read through the transcript, I gave it a color. Number 2 was red, altruism or selflessness. And I saw that this appeared 10 times in the transcript. And I defined it, of course. Every time you make a code book, you have a number. If you're going to use colors, because it's easier sometimes when you shed those concepts in different colors. Every time you see the same concept coming up, you use that same color. And of course, you have to give it a name, whether love, altruism, or appreciation for others. And then you also, in that code book, you record how many times that concept appears in the transcript. Altruism appeared 10 times, and appreciation of others appeared once. As you can see, approachable. These are different attributes of servant leadership, and that appeared 7 times. And in instance, when you describe a code, you must define it. So there is the number, the color, the name of the code, the number of times you find it in the transcript, and the definition of the code. So that is a code book. I'll give you a copy of this study. Maybe it will make your understanding much more easier. Okay, that is a code book. Let's now look at the different types of scales. This is also pretty easy to understand. We've got what we call the nominal scales, or nominal scale. We have the ordinal scale. We have the interval scale. We have the ratio scale. Let's look at each one of them one by one. A nominal scale. Nominal scale, the easiest way to understand it is to just go by the name, nominal, name. It sounds like a name. The categories are mutually exclusive. There's no overlap. They have no numerical significance. For instance, male, female. I have some examples here of a nominal scale. What is your gender? Male, female. What is your hair color? Brown, black, blonde, gray, other. Where do you live? North of the equator, south of the equator? Neither. So this is what you call a nominal scale. And the easiest way to remember is it's just you label, you name it. It's like you name each variable, and they don't have any quantitative value. They don't have any significance statistically. It's just a name. And it's called a nominal scale. And these are the examples. You just label something: dog, cat, cow, man, woman, nominal scale. Now, there is a subtype of nominal scale with only two categories, like male and female. It is called a dichotomous scale, but still a nominal scale. It's just that this is a special type of scale, a special type of nominal scale with only two categories, male and female. It's called dichotomous. The second type of scale is an ordinal scale. This is a scale where you have named the values and they are ordered. It is the order of the values that is important and significant. The difference between values is not really known. They are just ordered. An example is here. How do you feel today? Very happy, unhappy, okay, happy, very happy. This was very unhappy, unhappy, okay. So this is an ordinal scale. Another one would be, how satisfied are you with your service? 1, very unsatisfied. 2, somewhat unsatisfied. 3, neutral. 4, somewhat satisfied. 5, very satisfied. This is what is important here is the order of the values. The difference between the values is not known, and when you use the scale, it's not even important. What's important is the order of the values. 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. They depict non-mathematical or non-numeric concepts, such as levels of satisfaction, happiness, pain, or discomfort. They don't have an origin. They don't have a zero. They don't have a zero value. Therefore, the distance between the variables is unknowable. We don't know how far is very unsatisfied from somewhat satisfied. whether the difference is the same between somewhat unsatisfied with neutral. The differences between the variables is not known. We are only concerned with the order of the variables or the values. So that's an ordinal scale. The third type of scale is called the interval scale. And this is named, it's ordered, but it has got proportionate intervals. Interval scales are numeric scales in which we know both the order and the exact differences between the values. A good example is temperature, Celsius temperature or Fahrenheit. We know that the difference between each value is the same. For example, the difference between 60 and 50 degrees is 10, and it's the same difference between 80 and 70. So the differences between the values are the same. And when you use this scale, it is easy for you to carry out some analysis, some statistical analysis. For instance, ascertaining the central tendency of the data, say calculating the mean, the median, the standard deviation, the mode. These can be calculated using an interval scale. And I'm sure you have probably read that in the book, the course manual. There's no pre-decided starting point again, or a true zero value. For instance, when you're measuring temperature, the zero value is arbitrary because negative values of temperature do exist. So there is no point at which there is a 0 point. Even negative values make sense with this kind of scale. Then the third scale is called the ratio scale. This one is named, ordered, it has got proportionate intervals, and it can accommodate an absolute zero. Variables have an option for zero. The differences between the two variables is the same, and there's a specific order between the options. The best example of ratio scales are, for instance, weight or height. Your weight is a ratio scale. When you measure weight or height, that is called a ratio scale. Now, I want us now to look at how we can analyze open-ended questions, or how you can analyze qualitative data. When you have finally gathered your data from open-ended questions, from your interviews, whether it is from the focus discussion groups or from an in-depth interview with an individual, you should first of all immerse yourself in the data, read it over and over again, become familiar with the data, and listen to what the respondents are saying in their own words. That's the very first thing you need to do. Read extensively over and over again what they have said in the interview or on tape if you recorded the interview. After doing that, then you begin to develop what we call codes, finding codes. You have to find codes. The code is a concept that is given a name that most exactly describes what is being said. For instance, I showed you here from my research in the police force. I had a code called sacrifice. I noticed that every time as I interviewed this individual, there were moments when he would come up with words or statements that would depict sacrifice. For instance, let me give you an example. He says, I think when you choose to serve, of course in the police course, that comes with certain sacrifices, because you would not enjoy the comfort of your bed when someone is busy ringing that I'm busy being robbed. So this police officer, in his own words, talked about sacrifice as a police officer. And I saw this sentiment expressed in several quotations. So I developed a code, and I called it sacrifice. And as I gathered several quotations that would fall in that description, I then developed what we call a subcategory. A subcategory is a collection of several codes that convey the same concept. They describe the same phenomenon. So when you have developed a code, typically in the interview transcript, and you've highlighted a word, a phrase, a sentence, within paragraph that describes a specific phenomenon. You highlight the segment of text, and as I said, you give it a name. The code should be as close to the language of the participant as much as possible. Codes tend to be shorter, more concise, basic analytic units. Now, when you have got codes that are similar, then you group them together into a family. And that family would be called a category. After identifying and giving names and basic meaning units to codes, it is time to put them in categories or families. Similar codes are gathered together in a category. Again, stay as close as you can to the language of the participants. Remember, in these interviews, you are interested in hearing the respondents describe the experience in their own words. However, as you gather codes into categories, and then categories into more overarching categories, you find that you necessarily have more abstract names for the categories. In other words, what you have is you will have subcategories and categories, or what we call themes. So you start with codes, then you go to subcategories, and then you end up with an overarching category, or what we call themes. Going back to my study, I noticed that there was a phenomenon in the transcript. Every time this individual would talk about things that relate to sacrifice. And so I had a code called sacrifice. But there were other things that were related in terms of, for instance, selflessness or giving or serving. So I developed a subcategory called altruism, selflessness. So everything that was related, for instance, sacrifice, selflessness, and being there for people, I developed a subcategory where all these codes were grouped together. But I discovered there were other subcategories that were similar to the altruism. So I developed an overarching category, which can be called a theme. It was called service. And so that way, I was able to see certain themes that would come forth from this analysis. As you look at the data, you realize there is a theme or an overarching category of service, or I don't know, it may be something, maybe hatred or unforgiveness. But as you analyze the data, you end up with an overarching category describing phenomena. And you can call that overarching category theme. So that is how we analyze open-ended questions. Now, as I said here, as you code and categorize the data, also look for interrelationships among the various categories, because in the process, as you look at categories that are similar, you develop an overarching category or description that will then be able to accommodate all those similar categories, and you give it a name. Give it a name. Okay, that is all for today, and I will have another video made soon so that I will also discuss the other concepts in Unit 7. God bless you.